The story begins with a scene of pure, unadulterated terror. Sarah, a single mother, is jolted awake by a scream from the bathroom, a sound not of pain, but of primal, soul-shaking horror. She finds her 8-year-old son, Ethan, staring into the mirror, his small hands trembling as he points to his scalp. The small, itchy bumps she had dismissed as bug bites were no longer just bumps. One of them was moving. Under the taut, inflamed skin, a white, segmented creature was visibly writhing, its form pushing against the surface as it tried to burrow its way out. The sight was so unnatural, so grotesque, that Sarah's mind refused to process it for a moment, the world narrowing to the horrifying, undulating motion on her son's head. The narrative then flashes back 3 weeks to explain the origin of this nightmare. Sarah had saved for 2 years, working double shifts, to take Ethan on a dream trip to visit his grandmother in a rural village in Kenya. The trip was idyllic, filled with the vibrant colors and sounds of a world so different from their life in Chicago. But towards the end of their stay, Ethan developed small, itchy bumps on his head and neck. His grandmother, a kind woman with deep wrinkles around her eyes, had applied a traditional poultice, murmuring about pesky flies. Sarah, anxious to return to work, assumed they were simple insect bites or a minor allergic reaction that would clear up once they were home. However, on the long flight back, the bumps seemed to worsen, becoming more inflamed and tender. The story returns to the present, with Sarah's heart hammering in her chest as she realizes the idyllic trip had harbored a hidden, parasitic horror that was now erupting in her bathroom. Trapped by the brutal reality of financial hardship, a mountain of credit card debt from the trip, a job with no paid sick leave, and the looming threat of medical bills, Sarah is forced into an agonizing decision. She delays taking Ethan to the doctor, hoping the condition is just a severe reaction that will subside. She treats the bumps with over-the-counter creams, her anxiety growing with each application, but the condition defies her hope. The bumps multiply and grow, becoming angry, weeping lesions that force Ethan to wear a hat constantly. The school nurse calls, her voice firm. Ethan is suspended until he provides a doctor's note clearing him of a contagious condition. The suspension is the final blow, shattering Sarah's last excuse for inaction. The bureaucratic demand, meant to protect other children, becomes the cruel catalyst that forces a confrontation with a medical emergency far more horrifying than she ever could have imagined. A cruel series of misfortunes, a dead car battery that drained her emergency fund, followed by a missed paycheck due to a payroll error, formed an insurmountable barrier, preventing Sarah from getting Ethan the immediate medical care he desperately needed. Each day of delay felt like a slow-motion nightmare. The situation escalated horrifically 3 weeks after their return from Kenya. While bathing him, Sarah saw the undeniable proof that shattered all her hopes that it was just a rash. Under the bright bathroom light, a white, segmented larva was actively writhing inside one of the angry lesions on Ethan's scalp, its body pressing against the thin, translucent layer of skin in a grotesque, undulating motion. The story reached its critical turning point as Sarah, her breath catching in her throat, was forced to confront the horrifying reality. Her son was host to a parasitic infection. Sarah's frantic drive to the emergency room was a blur of traffic lights and the sound of Ethan's ragged, terrified breathing in the passenger seat. Her voice shook as she described the impossible sight to the triage nurse, a scene so surreal she feared she wouldn't be believed. An infectious disease specialist, Dr. Webb, was summoned. His presence was calm, but his eyes held a grave understanding as he examined Ethan's scalp under the bright clinical light. He delivered the diagnosis with a quiet, professional gravity. It's myosis, tumba fly larvae. He explained the parasitic life cycle with clinical precision. The flies lay their microscopic eggs on damp laundry dried in the open air. The eggs lie dormant until activated by the heat of a human body, at which point they hatch, and the larvae instinctively burrow into the skin to develop. A wave of nauseating, soul-crushing guilt washed over Sarah as the memory surfaced, the rows of their clean laundry, flapping innocently in the bright Kenyan sun at her mother's house. That simple, homely chore, performed with love and a sense of domestic care, had unknowingly seeded this living horror. She had, with the purest of intentions, become the instrument of her son's profound suffering. The treatment, Dr. Webb explained, would be as grueling as the diagnosis. It was a lengthy, delicate, and unavoidably painful procedure. Each larva would first be suffocated by applying a thick, occlusive layer of petroleum jelly to seal the lesion, cutting off its air supply and forcing the parasite to migrate toward the surface in a desperate search for oxygen. Then, with meticulous, surgical precision, each one would be extracted with forceps, ensuring it was removed intact to prevent a severe inflammatory reaction from any ruptured tissue left behind. The story concludes as the hours-long extraction process begins. The sterile silence of the treatment room is broken only by the clink of instruments, Ethan's stifled whimpers, and the soft, steady stream of comfort Sarah whispers into his ear, a litany of love and reassurance. She holds his small, trembling hand tightly, her own heart breaking with each painful extraction. It is a slow and agonizing journey toward healing, a physical and emotional trial where a mother's unwavering presence is the only anesthetic strong enough to dull the edge of terror. The hospital successfully extracted 27 tumblerfly larvae from Ethan's scalp and back in a traumatic, hours-long procedure that left both mother and son emotionally shattered. While the physical wounds began to heal, the ordeal carved deep, lasting scars into the fabric of their lives. The financial blow was immediate and crushing, and $8,400 medical bill arrived, a sum that felt insurmountable. Sarah was forced onto a stringent, 5-year payment plan that stretched their budget to the breaking point, transforming their already modest life into a constant calculation of scarcity and sacrifice. For Ethan, the trauma ran deeper. He was haunted by nightmares, his sleep punctuated by images of things crawling under his skin. He developed a compulsive habit of checking his arms and scalp for bumps, his small fingers tracing his skin in a constant, anxious ritual. At school, he was cruelly labeled the bug boy, a stigma that pushed him into a painful social isolation. The story poignantly highlights the lasting consequences. The faint, silvery scars on Ethan's skin were the least of it. The profound psychological toll and the relentless financial strain became the true, lingering legacy of the infection, all stemming from a single, innocent mistake with a basket of laundry. Channeling her overwhelming guilt into a fierce, determined action, Sarah began to research and write about their experience. She discovered that tumblerfly infections, while a known hazard in endemic regions, were rarely highlighted in mainstream travel health advisories. The simplest, most effective prevention, a quick pass with a hot iron over sun-dried clothes to kill the eggs, was not common knowledge. Her personal crusade evolved into public advocacy. She began collaborating with travel health organizations, including the CDC, pushing for clearer, more accessible information for travelers. A year later, small signs of healing began to emerge. Ethan's nightmares became less frequent. He occasionally laughed without immediately looking over his shoulder. The trauma had left a permanent mark, but it was no longer an open wound. The story concludes by reflecting on the hidden dangers that can accompany international travel and the profound importance of transforming personal suffering into public knowledge. Sarah's mission became clear: to ensure that their painful ordeal would serve as a crucial warning, turning a private nightmare into a powerful, life-saving public service. A series of misfortunes, a dead car battery that drained her savings for a tow, and a paycheck that was late due to a clerical error, formed a cruel barrier, preventing Sarah from getting Ethan the immediate medical care he desperately needed. Each day of delay felt like an eternity, the bumps on his scalp growing more inflamed and angry. The situation escalated into undeniable horror 3 weeks after their return from Kenya. While bathing him, Sarah saw it, under the bright bathroom light, a white, segmented larva was actively writhing inside one of the weeping lesions on Ethan's scalp, its body pressing against the thin, translucent layer of skin that was its only barrier to the outside world. This was not a rash or a bite. It was a living infestation. The story reached a critical turning point as Sarah, her hands trembling, confronted the horrifying reality that something was actively feeding on her son from the inside. Sarah's frantic drive to the emergency room was a blur of traffic lights and Ethan's muffled sobs. Her voice trembled as she described the impossible sight to the triage nurse: something moving under her son's skin. An infectious disease specialist, Dr. Webb, was summoned. His demeanor was calm, but his eyes held a grave understanding as he examined Ethan's scalp under a bright magnifying lamp. He delivered the diagnosis with a quiet, professional gravity: it's myiasis. Specifically from the tumblerfly, he explained the life cycle with clinical precision. The flies lay their microscopic eggs on damp laundry dried outdoors. The eggs lie dormant, invisible to the naked eye, until they are warmed by the heat of a human body. They then hatch, and the larvae instinctively burrow into the skin to develop, finding a host in the very comfort of a clean shirt. A wave of nauseating, soul-crushing guilt washed over Sarah. Her mind flashed back to the rows of clean laundry flapping innocently in the bright Kenyan sun at her mother's house. A simple, homely chore she had performed with love. That act of domestic care had unknowingly seeded this living nightmare. She had, with the purest of intentions, become the instrument of her son's suffering. The treatment, Dr. Webb explained, would be as grueling as the diagnosis. It was a lengthy, delicate, and unavoidably painful procedure. They would first smother each larva by applying a thick, occlusive layer of petroleum jelly over the lesion's opening, cutting off its air supply. This would force the parasite to migrate upward toward the surface in a desperate search for oxygen. Then, with surgical precision, he would use fine forceps to extract each larva, one by one, ensuring it was removed intact to prevent a severe inflammatory reaction from any ruptured tissue left behind. The story concludes as the hours-long extraction process begins. The clinical silence of the treatment room is broken only by Ethan's whimpers and the soft, steadying words Sarah whispers into his ear, her hand tightly gripping his. It is a slow, agonizing, but deliberate journey toward healing, a physical and emotional purging of the horror that had taken root in their lives. That's all about our stories. Do you have any thoughts after hearing the story? Please share it in the comments below.